Thank you all for joining us once again for ABNY's signature Power Breakfast event. I'm so excited to hear from this morning's speaker, Janno Lieber, Chair and CEO of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. You know, as we think about the work that ABNY has embarked on over the decades to mobilize and activate the public and private sectors here in the city and the region, to really make sure that the city continues to grow, to make sure our neighborhoods continue to grow, and make sure that there's opportunities for businesses. And I think about the contributions of all of us here in this room, those making the moves to make sure that they play their part in helping New York City recover from the events over the past 2 years for a more equitable and inclusive city. I can't emphasize more the importance of our public transportation system. One way to expand our workforce and improve the city's economy is by giving more people the ability to get around, to get to work and get to their jobs, to visit our city's shopping districts, and to patronize our city's arts and cultural institutions. You know, public transportation accomplishes this in an affordable, sustainable, and environmentally friendly way. You know, New York City's public transportation system, what many have called our city's great economic equalizer, and I know Pat Foy, who's in the room, talks about this all the time, is an engine for upward mobility and the key to jump-starting an inclusive recovery, and carrying millions of New Yorkers every day to work, to take care of their families, and to keep our city moving and thriving. The subways, the buses, the Long Island Railroad, and Metro North are vital to the health of New York and all New Yorkers. And the continuous investment in these cities make them accessible for more and more New Yorkers. Making the Long Island Railroad more accessible has impacted my life directly. You know, back in 2018, when the MTA launched the Atlantic Ticket Program, pilot program, I, along with many Long Island riders, were able to travel between Southeast Queens and Atlantic Terminal for $5, no matter what time of day, making my trip downtown Manhattan faster and more affordable. And the city ticket, introduced some years ago for riders on Saturdays and Sundays to travel within the city for just $5. Earlier this year was extended to allow me to travel back and forth to Penn Station off-peak any day for a flat fee of only $5, making my return to the office even more painless. And the biggest thank you I have for today's guest speaker is the accessibility upgrades announced last month to the Laurelton Long Island Railroad train station. Thank you, Janno. A new elevator for a station with not only a large ridership, but to many seniors who enjoy traveling into Manhattan in their retired years. You know, our MTA is a lifeline for many of us, for many New Yorkers, providing important mobility and economic growth for our city. And we are lucky to have Janno Lieber at the helm. And now, I'd like to welcome our chairman, Stephen Rubenstein, to the stage, who will introduce today's special guest. Stephen?
The one thing I'll say about what Melva said, it's fascinating to think of the scope and breadth of our system, but yet how intimate the experience is for everybody who gets on it, right? You're about your station, you're about your Metro card. You know, it's amazing that it can do both. So, thank you. Anyway, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming back. As we come out of the pandemic and we imagine our city's path forward, it's unclear what's going to remain the same and what has really changed for good. But no matter where we wind up, literally every path to recovery shares something in common, and that is MetroCard swipes and OmniTaps. Our transit system is one of the things that make us the greatest city in the world, and that cannot change. It's our pleasure to welcome today the man in charge of our commutes, an amazing public servant, and a longtime friend of all New Yorkers, whether they know him or not. He was recently named Chairman and CEO of the MTA, Janno Lieber. Janno, we're glad to have you back. As my late grandfather, Solomon Foreman of the Lower East Side, would have said, I knew him then. Janno, a self-described hardcore New Yorker, is both an eternal optimist about our city and a fighter for our future. During the worst days of the pandemic, I know many people on this room were on the other end of his regular calls trying to rally support for our system in DC, working through big problems that they were confronting with every day and trying to lure riders back. As many here know, by the way, as many here know, Janno is a very deep New York story. He's a kid from the Upper West Side. His dad was a macher in publishing. His mom, Mimi, who passed away last year at the age of 93, almost single-handedly pioneered the use of focus groups on Madison Avenue. Janno has made New York's streets, subways, and buses his vocation. He worked for Ed Koch in City Hall. He worked for the Clinton administration. He helped rebuild the World Trade Center. And he has truly had his hands on the wheel of our city's transportation his entire career. I think it's safe to say, as head of the MTA, he has, to this day, his hand in the roles of our day-to-day life as much as any elected official. And I just want to take one moment to thank, I know Pat Foy is here, Sarah Feinberg is here, many people, former leaderships in the MTA. I want to thank you all for your service and say we're really appreciative. Running the MTA is a tough job, even in the best of times. And it ain't the best of times. I don't need to go too deep into the challenges Janno is facing for all of you in this room. Ridership is still way off pandemic levels when we talk pre-pandemic levels. And when we talk about out-year budgets of the MTA, they use words like fiscal cliff, and the increasing crime is holding our system and our recovery back. The good news is we have a rare windfall from the federal infrastructure bill and American Rescue Plan, a chance not just to keep afloat, but to actually improve the system and make riders want to come back. As the recent head of the MTA's capital construction, nobody knows better than Janno all the nuts and bolts, and literally the nuts and bolts of this system that go into making it function. I've seen his passion for updating our system, keeping it world-class, and especially keeping up with technology so that we meet the technology used around the world. I do need to highlight one issue, and that is safety. Janno, as you know, it is really top of mind for everybody here in this room. We know it's not a problem with easy answers, but we are really glad that you are the one leading our system every day and helping us find the path forward. We're rooting for you. We have a lot riding on you. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our train daddy, Janno Lieber.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Malva. Train daddy, more realistic, because I aspire to be the train stepdaddy. A little less glamorous, but somebody who sticks around for a long time and convinces the family that he can deliver the presents at Christmas time. I'm thrilled to be here at ABNY to talk about the MTA, where we are, and some of the challenge that we're facing. ABNY, this organization was built by what many of us think of as the greatest generation of New Yorkers, folks who, from labor and business and community organizations, who saw that New York was in a dire situation in the 1970s and decided to do something about it. That is exactly the type of civic engagement, cutting across industry, demographic, and neighborhood lines, that we're going to need right now to address the region's challenges and the system's challenges as we emerge from the pandemic. One thing that ABNY has always been rock solid about, and Stephen talked about it already, was the importance of mass transit. You've always recognized that the MTA is the lifeblood of the city. Our entire way of life, residential density, people creating economic value in skyscrapers and swivel chairs, as many bars, restaurants, nightlife venues, and performing arts spaces as the next 4 or 5 American cities combined in terms of population. None of it works without mass transit. So I'm here today to talk about the good, the bad, and especially the ugly the not-so-good stuff, where we do need an ABNY-like consensus in order to overcome and move forward. Some of that bad stuff was highlighted again last night by another high-profile shooting in Queens, where two guys who apparently knew each other got into an argument, somebody pulled a gun, and somebody is dead. But as I go through this, I'm going to touch first on our extraordinary success using federal funds to plug our $2 billion operating deficit coming out of COVID, how we persevered on capital projects through COVID. And then there's the bad. One of the most immediate threats to our system, as I said, is the real and perceived safety problems on the subway. And lastly, the ugly, where things get really complicated. Surging fare evasion, in addition to all the other problems we're facing, surging fare evasion threatens our bottom line and also frays social norms when law-abiding New Yorkers, and some of us saw it on the way here today, law-abiding New Yorkers see too many of their neighbors slip through open emergency gates, duck a turnstile, or walk onto an MTA bus without paying. Fare evasion is an ugly problem indeed. But here at ABNY today, I'm excited to announce a new initiative on top of everything else we're trying to do on safety, a new initiative to respond to that chronic issue. But first, the good. The MTA has survived COVID to fight another day. You'll remember that in the spring of 2020, and I got a shout out to Pat Foy for his leadership during the heart of COVID. Amazing. But at the spring of 2020, transit ridership had dropped by more than 90%. We were literally losing $200 million a week. COVID posed an existential threat to everything that we value about the city, but especially to mass transit. And despite all this, our heroic workforce kept going right through COVID, even when we didn't really understand transmittal. Kept the trains running, kept the buses running 24/7, and transported essential workers to where they were going and powered the city through the pandemic. Today, weekday subway ridership has recovered to roughly 60% of our pre-pandemic base, and the MTA has a balanced budget through 2025, due only to billions in federal aid. Thank you, Chuck Schumer. Yeah. But also, I have to say, we have a balanced budget because of hundreds of millions more delivered by Governor Hochul this year in her budget. That allowed us to put off fare increases and so much more. But a significant deficit remains in the out years, and we need policymakers and thought leaders to begin identifying solutions to assure that the MTA board won't be forced to use our last resort tools: fare hikes, layoffs, service cuts, in order to balance the MTA's operating budget. I'll come back to that with all of you in months to come. But for now, the MTA, again, thanks to Governor Hochul and our leadership in Congress, is in a much better place than any time since the onset of the pandemic. With that operating budget crisis addressed for the moment, we've continued to plow ahead on capital projects. Everything needed to rebuild, improve, and expand the system. Projects underway before COVID never stopped. Thank you, Gary LaBarbera and the men and women of unionized, organized labor, because they showed up. And we figured out how to work safe, and we never stopped any projects for more than a week or two. We actually were able to take advantage of the low ridership to accelerate literally billions of dollars of construction work. The results of that ought to inspire confidence in the MTA moving forward. Look at what we did: a total redo of the Times Square shuttle, the oldest element of the MTA system. Expansion and rehabilitation of the entire Grand Central mezzanine. If you've been through that on the subway, it's a lot bigger, and there's a lot more turnstiles and areas to circulate. The L train tunnel project, high controversy, but it finished 6 months early and $100 million under budget. and also those ADA upgrades that Melva mentioned. We were able to finish a record 14 subway stations during the first year of COVID, and now we have 26 more in process. And that is a pace for ADA accessibility that's never been achieved by the MTA ever before. And I can't totally skip over East Side Access, the multi-billion-dollar effort to bring the Long Island Railroad into Grand Central Terminal. After years of schedule delays, when I came to the MTA, I insisted that we stick to the 2022 timeline. Every time it had been looked at before, the schedule got pushed back, we said no. Now, we're going to get this done by the end of the year. Governor Hochul is all over it. East Side Access is finishing by the end of this year. 2022 is also the year we begin to see the transformation of Penn Station. We opened an iconic new entrance on 7th Avenue, sort of overlooked because it was done in the middle of COVID, but it restores the presence of Penn Station on 7th Avenue, which was almost invisible. And now we're in the home stretch of a project that will double the width of the main Long Island Railroad corridor from 7th to 8th Avenue and raise the ceiling significantly to 18 feet, transforming that central vein of the station from what Governor Hochul has called a dungeon to the kind of modern facility that New Yorkers really deserve. The next step on that front is implementing the governor's broader plan for Penn, which prioritizes improvements to the existing station. She's right, because while Amtrak has decamped to the gorgeous new Moynihan train hall across 8th Avenue, mostly paid for by the state of New York, by the way, most New Yorkers are stuck in the existing Penn because that's where the Long Island Railroad tracks terminate, and that's where the 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue subways stop. They don't have a choice, in most cases, to move to Moynihan. Joe Biden once said that New York should be ashamed of LaGuardia Airport. What do you think he'd say if he took a tour of existing Penn Station during the evening rush when thousands of people are crowded into cramped, low-ceiling corridors, gazing up at the track assignment board like they're waiting for Moses to come down from Mount Sinai with the tablets? We got to change that. Now the bad. All of these investments and upgrades won't make a difference if people don't feel safe using mass transit. That's our biggest challenge right now, from the horrific murder of Michelle Alyssa Go to this month's terrible mass shooting in Sunset Park. Our passengers deserve to be safe and to feel safe in the system. Later today, there's an event celebrating the first 100 days of the Adams administration. Fresh breezes have been blowing since January 1, and let me tell you, they've reached the MTA's underground kingdom. The MTA is so thrilled to have partners in City Hall and in Albany who are so fully committed not just to subway safety, but to everything about our mission. But as the mayor has made clear, we need to further increase law enforcement's visibility throughout the system and to get serious about enforcement of the MTA's long-standing rules of conduct. Safety isn't just about major crime stats. When riders see people breaking the rules, smoking, public urination, open drug use, vandalism, they wonder, what else might that person do to me? And conversely, the overwhelming majority of our riders tell us that the one thing that makes them feel safer is to see a cop on the train or on the platform, which is where they're feeling vulnerable. The MTA has been pushing this strategy, moving cops onto trains and platforms, for some time, long before Mayor Adams moved into City Hall, and I'm thrilled that the mayor and his police commissioner have promised to deploy cops to those areas and actually announced after the Sunset Park shooting that they were surging cops into the transit system. In fact, with this incredibly ambitious agenda the mayor has set for subway safety, we may need those extra cops for a good long while. But we've already seen how this redeployment of our police can, in fact, work. 2 examples. On a single day last month, where 2 officers were patrolling on the J train, saw a man walking between the cars, which is illegal because so many people fall between the cars when they're doing that. They approached the guy, he ran, and when they apprehended him, they recovered a .22 caliber firearm, loaded. A similar situation in Jackson Heights. Police saw an intoxicated guy lying face down on the platform, approached him. When he rolled over, a loaded .22 fell out of his jacket. That's cops on platforms, cops on trains. Now, people are talking about subway cameras a lot these days, understandably, in the wake of the violence in Sunset Park. They are a big part of the safety equation, so let me just say a few words about that. Today, we have 10,000 cameras system-wide in the subways, an increase of about 60% in a few short years. No one sent us a pile of money to do that. We just made it a priority, and we did it. And it was Sarah Feinberg who made that happen. Sarah, thank you. The failure rate of those cameras is about 1%, which, as the NYPD emphasized in the wake of this horrific incident in Sunset Park, that percentage, that reliability is the best of any agency they work with. In fact, we had people working on those cameras less than 24 hours after the image stopped feeding. And they were working on the cameras at the moment when the subway attack took place, and they were actually pushed out of the comms room by the cops in the aftermath. We're proud of what we've done with cameras so far. As I said, we have 600 cameras just on the N line out of the 10,000, and we're able to provide the NYPD at the time of after the subway shooting with 36 separate video perspectives on that, along that line and in pursuit of the suspect. We take comfort that our video produced images of the suspect in multiple stations and on buses before and after the attack, which also helped the police to track and apprehend him. But we're taking this incident as a prompt to examine how we can improve. And we actually welcome all of the reviews and audits and investigations that various levels of government have announced. In particular, since the U.S. House of Representatives Homeland Security Committee has questioned how have you been using the money we've been sending for transit security, we're thrilled to explain to them how it's been used for NYPD deployments and cameras. But we're also going to point out that the amount of that money went down significantly after 9/11, and then it stayed flat in the last 10 years. And this is a hot button for me, we get 16% of the transit security money nationally. We're 40% of the riders. Doesn't seem right, and maybe with the Democratic Congress, we can do something about that. But now on to the ugly that I mentioned at the outset. A huge part of the ecosystem of safety is addressing fare evasion. There's a woman who was sitting in the center, I think you're at table 16, and I were on the E-train together just before this event, and I saw 3 folks walk in the emergency gates. This has been a growing problem for us in the last few years, almost quadrupling in recent years on the subways from about 3% to about 12.5%. And it's even worse on buses, where 1 in 3 customers today skip out on the fare. Fare evasion hurts us on commuter rail, too, and even at bridges and tunnels, where we're seeing more and more fake and obscured license plates specifically designed to evade the camera system. It's an epidemic behavior engaged in by too many commuters across all demographics, all neighborhoods, and all income levels. This is really a significant challenge. Obviously, it hits us in the fare box, but equally important, I would argue, fare evasion tears at our social fabric. Here's the hole in the fare box. At the current rates, fare beating is going to cost us over $500 million just this year. Unless the agency is financially stable, we won't be able to do what it takes to support New York's economic comeback or to achieve our climate goals. And MTA's financial condition has huge implications, we all know this, for the transit equity agenda and our effort to chip away at New York's transportation deserts, to make sure that neighborhoods that don't have real mass transit can finally get some. We want to be able to grow service, not to shrink it to fill operating budget gaps. Financial problems at the MTA inevitably have the biggest effect on New Yorkers who have no choice but to depend on mass transit. Second, here's the hole in the social fabric, which is to me equally important. Pervasive fare evasion is a threat to the spirit that makes New York not just a great city, but a great community. I often say that while I love Times Square, Prospect Park, and other great New York destinations, the transit system is our most important public space. It may not remind you of a church, a mosque, or a synagogue, but I actually think the transit system is a kind of sacred space. It's where everyday New Yorkers, every day, of all backgrounds, encounter each other and prove out the world's greatest experiment in diversity and tolerance. And amazingly, this morning, the New York Times posted an essay by a first-generation immigrant about her experience on the subway, and she wrote, "The subway defines home for a city of people united, above distance, race, class, and labels." Powerful. In short, paying the fare isn't just something we owe the MTA, it's something we owe each other. Our New York sense of fairness and community is violated when rule-abiding, honest folks, people who swipe because they know it's the right thing to do, even if it's a stretch economically, when they see others dodging the fare. I want you to imagine for a second you're a nurse on the way to a hospital, teacher on the way to school, a person on a fixed income. You paid your fare this morning because you know it's the right thing to do. Now, how do you feel when you see folks not paying? Especially if you see people, and we have countless images of this, people in designer clothes, carrying $7 lattes, waltzing through emergency gates at Wall Street or on the Upper East Side. What hardworking, fare-paying New Yorkers tell us, in a word, is that seeing fare evasion makes them feel like suckers. I'm afraid that with rampant fare evasion, we're approaching a tipping point where people who want to play by the rules become so demoralized that they say, "Why should I pay when so many others don't?" Some of the most memorable moments for me at MTA have been at public hearings. You know, when we have to raise the fare, by a couple percentage points, and we were doing it regularly, we have to have these fare hearings. And riders show up. These are people who are objecting to a 10 to 15 cent increase on the base subway fare. They show up to explain how much they are outraged by fare evasion. And one of them put it this way: for people who are paying to be on buses and trains, this is a part-time teacher living on a fixed income in the Bronx. For people who are paying to be on the buses and trains, to see this, it feels like an insult. Fare evasion is a problem we're going to have to solve together. That's why today I'm convening a panel of distinguished New Yorkers to take a deep dive on this issue. The goal is to hit the reset button on how we approach fare evasion at the MTA, but across government. We've come up with a really, really strong list of participants who are representative of all our New York communities and areas of expertise. I'm excited to report that Melva Miller of ABNY will be sitting on this blue ribbon panel. Melva, thank you. The group's mission will be to find and promote all of the above solutions to this all of the above problem. It will be driven by the principles of fairness and citizenship, values that have long animated ABNY. The panel will produce policy and action recommendations over the summer. We anticipate they're going to focus on 3 areas: education, equity, and enforcement. Education. Our Blue Ribbon panel will come up with new ideas about how we can get the word out that paying the fare is simply the right thing to do. Asian, Black, white, brown, rich, middle class, low income, all ages, all genders, everybody taps, everybody swipes. It's basic civic behavior that knits all our social fabric together. We'll work with our partners in the school to get that message out to our kids, and I'm thrilled that New York City Schools Chancellor David Banks, has agreed to serve on the panel. And we'll be working to get that word out also to white-collar folks, those people going through the emergency exit gates with their $7 lattes. Equity. For my first day as chair and CEO, I've been talking about affordability. Our system is one of the few things that actually makes this city affordable, especially when compared to the cost of owning a car, which runs $10,000 plus all in per year. Another positive sign of our affordability, the ratio between fares on the one hand and the minimum wage in New York is among the lowest of any city in the country. And look at another measure watched closely for many years by New York City transit geeks. Right now, we are way cheaper than a New York slice of pizza. As Melva mentioned, in recent months, we have added a wide range of additional discounts. Lucky 13, tap the first 12 rides a week. Everything after that is free. But a lot of other discounts designed to make riding even cheaper on subways, buses, and commuter railroads. But all that said, the panel will start from the principle that no one should be denied opportunity to connect with jobs, education, and everything New York has to offer because they can't afford to swipe or tap. So our Blue Ribbon panel, which includes longtime activists for economic justice like Joanne Wu of the Asian American Federation, the panel will explore how we can work with the city to expand access to the MTA system for our low-income neighbors. That will mean, for example, taking a fresh look at the Fair Fares program. Many of you haven't heard about this, but that program provides deeply discounted Metro cards to New Yorkers living below the poverty line. Mayor Adams and the City Council have begun to restore the funding the prior administration cut out of the program during the pandemic. But today, only 200,000 of the 800,000 New Yorkers who qualify actually receive the benefit. And even people who are enrolled rarely use it. There's clearly a communication issue. Fair Fares needs to be publicized, it needs to be dramatically bigger, we need to be more inclusive, and it needs to be easier to access. I am committed to working with the city to see if we can do better in this incredibly important area. Enforcement. We can't shy away from law enforcement done right as one tool in our anti-fare beating toolkit. Enforcement helps send the right, do the right thing message. It also helps keep the system safe. Newsflash, people who commit robberies and violent crimes generally don't bother with MetroCard swipes or OmniTaps, and they don't want to get stopped. What we want, all of us, is to deter crime before it happens by keeping the bad actors out of the system in the first place. Fare invasion enforcement can pick up all kinds of illegal guns and other weapons, as evidenced by the couple of incidents I mentioned. But maybe more important, over time, it can discourage criminals from coming into our system to do crime in the first place. But let me be clear, I am not interested in sending people to jail, especially young people who make mistakes or low-income New Yorkers. Failure to pay $2.75 or even the reduced fare of $1.37 without more shouldn't change the trajectory of anybody's life. Critics of past approaches to fare evasion enforcement, led by my dear friend David Jones, who's a member of the MTA board and who's also going to serve on this panel, people like David have raised serious questions about equity and racial justice. Our panel is going to look seriously at those questions and recommend solutions that respond to them, as well as all the other questions. I'm going to challenge the panel to look for a fresh mix of fare evasion enforcement tools that are both effective and equitable. What's in that mix will ultimately be determined by the panel, but here's some food for thought. What about, for example, greater use of civil penalties that aren't administered by the police? Parking restrictions are enforced by unarmed traffic enforcement agents. There have been proposals in the legislature along this line. Let's take a look at fare enforcement regimes that maybe use some of these ideas. What about finding new ways of sorting the law enforcement response based on who we're dealing with? I talked about this a moment ago. There's an important difference between folks who just need a second chance and serious recidivists and violent criminals. For the latter, I'll hope the panel will support some appropriate prosecution. Can the panel help us work with our partners in the district attorney's offices to come up with a clear, unified approach? It would be great to have an agreement among everybody about what will and won't be charged and under what circumstances. The panel's all-of-the-above approach will start with education, equity, and enforcement, but it won't end there. I will invite the group to examine technology solutions. For example, in an all-Omni system, we'll have new technical capacity to check for fair compliance beyond the gate, inside the system. So our panel might take a look at what many systems outside the U.S. already do, civilian fare checkers on trains, platforms, and buses. I'd also invite a look at how physical design can help reduce fare evasion. There has to be a better way to comply with the fire code than our current emergency gates, which have become totally porous to fare evasion. We've all seen it. People walk out, walk in, they open the gate, and 5 people come in after them. There's a next generation of turnstiles and entry gates coming, and I want the panel to look at how those future fare arrays can be more evasion-proof. Look, I'm excited to see what this panel comes up with, and I look forward to pursuing their recommendations with our many partners in this work, the DA's offices, the courts, police, educators, the legislature, the tech community, the design and construction community, and of course, with City Hall, with Albany, and with our own great MTA workforce and their union leadership. Coming to real, long-lasting, effective solutions is going to take some time on safety, fare evasion, and all the other challenges we face. But I always believe we have to do better. As Stephen referenced, I grew up in New York in the 70s, and just the experience of seeing that amazing evolution has made me an incurable optimist of New York. And that was before I spent 14 years at the World Trade Center, where we proved that we could overcome the naysayers and create a better version of Lower Manhattan after 9/11. So I can't help being super optimistic. The MTA is the lifeline of New York City. We're having some tough times, but I believe that New York and we will come out of it stronger and better than ever, and I really look forward to working with everybody in this room to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Janno. I want to especially thank you for how thoughtful the commission seems and the care with which you're taking this, that I think is something our fellow New Yorkers deserve and we all deserve, so thank you. We have time for a few questions.
I just want to ask about the Penn Station plan, because it seems like, being a frequent Long Island Railroad user, that really the only way you're going to improve it is if you move Madison Square Garden. I know. But with all of the land surrounding that's in play right now in the governor's plan, wouldn't there be a chance to move the garden, keep it in the neighborhood, so that the garden users win, because right now getting into the garden is also a negative experience, and then the commuters win as well, because you actually will have the ability to raise the ceiling and the roof. So I hear there are talks about that. I'm wondering if you can share with us
Sure.
any
Listen,
insight.
I get to be agnostic on the garden, because that is an issue of the city of New York and special permit and so on and so on. But the one thing I do know is this is urgent, and any plan to move the garden, whether good, bad, is going to take a while. It's going to take, it would take years and years to be executed. So the governor has said, we need a better Penn Station for New Yorkers now. There is an incredible window of opportunity to change existing Penn, and great things can be achieved without moving the garden. There's a window of opportunity when East Side Access opens, and half of our Long Island Railroad customers or more move over to the new terminal in the basement of Grand Central. And before Metro North, the connection that we're building for Metro North to come into Penn is completed, we have an opportunity to do real construction. And I think the governor, and I don't want to waste that 4 or 5 year period. We want to fix Penn now. The good news is we've got incredible success underway. We built that new entrance on 7th Avenue. The Long Island Railroad Concourse project is going great guns. It's going to be completed at the end of this year. We just want to keep going and keep transforming Penn. There's a track record the MTA has built of successful on-time major construction in Penn. And if Amtrak will agree and New Jersey Transit, and that's all complicated, what we want to do is just open it up. And we've shown images of how if you take out half of the Amtrak level, which is now pretty underused because Amtrak has, as I say, decamped to Moynihan, you really can have a station which is open, feels as open as Moynihan, and completely changes the experience. The other thing to bear in mind is all those narrow corridors in the basement of Penn, that's because they've got back of house and mechanical spaces down there. We want to sweep all that stuff out, make it wide open like Moynihan, or even, God willing, like Grand Central, and deliver for customers, but now, not to wait another generation when the whole process of figuring out how to move the garden is executed.
Thank you, Melva. Brett Colazzi at HR&A Advisors, and thank you, Janno, for your remarks. My question is about the capital plan more broadly. Can you speak to where we are in the capital plan in terms of funding for the current 5-year plan, how far that can take us in terms of the priorities that you've laid out for expansion of the system, state of good repair, and then to the extent we need to prioritize, are there certain priorities that have shifted since 2020 in your mind in terms of what kind of projects we should be focusing on?
A lot of good stuff you're raising. One is we have, obviously we have this historic $52 billion capital program, which the legislature and the previous governor enacted. We were delayed. We couldn't award new contracts. We couldn't start new projects during the height of COVID, obviously, because we didn't know if we were going to have to use capital money just to keep the lights on and the system operating. But since the money from Washington has come, the COVID relief money, we have started kicking that capital program into gear. How are we so there's a ton of work going on. It's the stuff that you've heard about. It's ADA accessibility at 70 stations. It's re-signaling many, many different lines. It's zero emissions buses. All of those projects are going forward at full speed. But we are also, in terms of the priority in terms of order, what we started to do during COVID when we didn't know if we were going to have the full amount of money was to prioritize the state of good repair and safety-sensitive work to make sure we are keeping the system operating, so the beams don't fall down, that the signals don't fail, all of that state of good repair work. So that stuff is going a little earlier, but throughout we're following a very new approach to construction. We're using design build. We're bundling projects to maximize the efficiency. When we take a line out of service, we want to work on every project up and down that line at once to take advantage, and it's already bearing fruit in terms of cost and schedule. So that's where we are.
Hi, good morning. Kathleen Collins from Hunter College, where one of those 26 new station renovations you mentioned is getting underway outside our door. But my question is, as you're thinking about increasing equity and affordability, are you considering expanding access to free Metro cards for all CUNY students, given the economic benefits of them persisting and completing college?
I don't know the specifics of that, but I met recently with the new chancellor and the board chair of CUNY to talk about partnerships with the city university system, both in terms of we want CUNY students to have free access to the system because it's such a way for that community to access education and job opportunities and really connect. But also we talked about internships. I want to have the CUNY system feed into the MTA. We now have a couple of high schools, which are great, which train kids in transit-type mechanical work, but we also want, there's no reason we shouldn't be taking finance students from Baruch and design and construction and engineering professionals from CCNY, which has a great engineering school. There are different parts of the CUNY system that should feed into MTA, and we're building an internship program with CUNY to really optimize that opportunity. It's an area I'm really excited about.
Janno, can I ask a question about congestion pricing? Sure. Sort of where do we stand and how substantial is it as you look forward? You've talked about a 2026 fiscal cliff in terms of just us having real economic trouble?
So congestion pricing is, the fiscal cliff I'm talking about is the operating budget. The money that congestion pricing will produce when we get it going is intended to go to the capital program. It's the last $15 billion of the MTA's current capital program. So we're counting on that money. Right now, we don't have a cash flow problem for the capital program, but here's where we are on congestion pricing. We were on schedule 100% to execute on the plan, which is that we had to do enormous amount of modeling and outreach, all that was negotiated with the federal government, which sets the standards for how you do a federal environmental process. They came back with 400 plus questions. We're now wading our way through the questions. The idea is to try to keep to the schedule, which yielded a federal environmental approval, so-called record of decision, that will allow us to start building out the infrastructure. So that record of decision was hoped to come by the end of this year. It may slip, but we are determined to get congestion pricing built out and actually operational in calendar 2023, and that remains our commitment.
All right, Janno, thank you. We're grateful. We're here to help.